Hello and good evening. I'm Melissa Idris.
And I'm Sharad Kutan.
Welcome to Consider This, the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. We're celebrating teachers on the show tonight. Educators and school leaders are a central component of the classrooms that will have to be redesigned for the COVID-19 crisis. Now, joining us on the line to help highlight the critical role that teachers play in the response to and in the recovery from the pandemic, we have Jenifer Lasimbang, Assistant Minister of Education and Innovation in Sabah. Thank you so much for joining us on the show this evening. Now, can you begin by telling us what has been the most significant impact of the lockdown on teachers and the school system in Sabah?
Thank you, Melissa. I think teachers, especially all of us, are having a hard time during this MCO, but I think teachers, especially those who are teaching in rural and remote schools in Sabah and some island community schools, really they are facing the challenge of ensuring that the learning and facilitation process to run smoothly over the MCO period. And I think because in Sabah, 70% of our students are living in the rural, some very remote communities on islands and plantations. Not only they do not have efficient or adequate internet access, but they don't have access to even gadgets like computers, smartphone, mobile devices at home for them to, to access to the online teaching and learning sessions.
Can I ask you specifically about the rural and marginal communities? I understand that in the last budget allocation by the federal government, there was money to be poured into dilapidated schools, upgraded dilapidated schools, and I believe Sabah and Sarawak received over 700 million ringgit in allocations. Now, with the change in federal government, are those funds still going to be going to Sabah, in particular, to deal with those dilapidated schools?
Yes, the budgets that were approved, we really hope that after the MCO period is over, we're looking very hopefully that we will be able to fix the many schools, more than 500 dilapidated and almost 100 schools that was already declared unsafe in Sabah. So we shouldn't putting the politics behind, we should really move forward, and we need to fix all the schools for the students to have a safe learning space.
Okay, so you mentioned that 70% of students in Sabah are in rural and remote areas. Now, I'm wondering, has the design of the COVID response in terms of teaching and learning taken into consideration some of these material and cultural realities of the inequalities on the ground?
Okay, taking into that consideration, I note that the teachers are doing their very best. They're trying to be innovative, creative, in some very dire situation where there's absolutely no internet access at all. The teachers are using whatever resources they have to ensure that the teaching and learning process continues. And I think one of my biggest, one of the things that we can look at is the different, even literacy level and the knowledge and skills of parents, and of course their immediate family will greatly influence how they can support the home learning. And we also look at how, I'm very worried about children with disabilities, and also children with parents with disability will definitely find it very difficult to support their children's learning at home.
What about the role of the state government then? Because you seem to have maybe a deeper sense of what is happening on the ground. How does the state government play a role? I mean, what exactly is it supplying teachers in order to fill the gaps that you just pointed to?
At that level, of course, we work very closely with the Department of Education in Sabah. Ultimately, education is under the purview of Ministry of Education Malaysia, but we are here in Sabah to support whatever the teachers or any of the education sector need in terms of support, and we're here to listen, and we're looking at giving the right input. For example, we know that the internet access is one of the biggest drawback, and maybe perhaps we can explore other ways or other methods of delivering home learning to areas where there's absolutely no internet access and it will not be available in a very near future. But maybe we can come up with innovative ideas like using radio, for example, to deliver education. So we are here to look at, and of course we have the ground experience on what is happening in Sabah.
So apart from the internet issues, the connectivity issues, and the quality internet, what are the teachers telling you? I mean, you say you're listening to the teachers in Sabah. What is it that teachers need the most? Is it training? Is it resources? What kind of support are they asking for?
Yeah, I think while many of the teachers, they do have the additional skills to produce, like, for example, e-learning materials. But some of them, they might be even stuck in locations that probably went home just before the MCO was enforced. And where they are, they might not have the materials nor the equipment to create or publish their own online lesson. I mean, everybody is taken by surprise with this and nobody is that prepared. But of course, the teachers wouldn't have enough time to basically migrate the whole learning into an online platform. But of course, there's many areas that teachers are trying their best. Like some of them, instead of relying on the online home learning, some of them, they have to basically print out and deliver assignments and workbooks, and actually some of them, they need to go through very difficult terrain to actually deliver this to their students. And they have been contacting the grassroots leaders like the MPKKs or the village heads to help them deliver the materials to the students and then pick them up and send it back to the school or the teachers concerned. So everybody's trying to cope here with whatever is happening in our space.
I wonder, though, it seems like maybe in many rural areas, the virus might not actually be present. I mean, many green areas might allow for schools to return to a normal, ordinary and conventional ways of teaching. What's your sense of the timeline for a return, and what kind of areas might move more quickly back into the normal mode, and where areas where things might have to change more radically?
Okay, we know that most of the rural areas are not affected, but we just can't take any chances. I mean, education we can delay, but we can't take any chance of just like, okay, being complacent and say, okay, with the green area, there's no. But we, as the person coming into the communities, we might be the one bringing the virus and. But I think we just have to comply. We just have to talk to parents right now and asking them, are you nervous about your children not being able to access to the normal education? And they said, what is half a year or a year not in the usual school setup? Right. Rather, we do not want our kids to be exposed. Let's teach them some other things to learn, like life skills, for example. Let them touch the ground, let them do some gardening. Let's teach them something, another, what do you call it?
Other skills, right? I love that, Jenifer. I'm so glad you brought that up, because I'm wondering whether this crisis is actually, there's an opportunity for us to rethink education. Is there room for creative responses in the way we've been approaching rote learning?
I think it's the best way for us to rethink. I mean, technology has always been there for us to use, but it also creates gaps. Not just gaps between the rural and remote communities, but even within the urban setting. The rich and poor will have different access, or we say benefit or advantage or things like that. And that's why I was thinking of we need to look at other ways of what exactly is education. Yes, not going out of the way and not looking at the formal need to know writing, reading, and counting, but we also need to relook at what is it, because the needs in the rural communities is very different from the needs for the urban children. And I think this is the best time, basics of education is there, the formal, but I think this COVID-19 and the MCO has given us a time to look at, and parents actually. I'm a mom to a 9-year-old, and I've never felt so hopeless in teaching my own child math.
We definitely appreciate teachers so much more after this MCO, for sure. Thank you so much for speaking with us tonight, YB Jenifer. Appreciate your time. After this, we're going to be speaking to one of the teachers that inspired the film Adiwiraku. Stay tuned to consider this.
Bayangkan pagi anda dengan pandangan dan perbincangan luar kota. Berita dan isu semasa yang wajib anda ketahui sebelum anda keluar rumah. Paparan terkini, kupasan mendalam. Kami temani anda di waktu pagi untuk hari yang lebih ceria dan produktif. Gigi Ahmad, Afizi Azaman, Hakim Rahman, Hafizi Rosli dan Naila Huda. Semuanya di Awani Pagi. Bayangkan pagi anda dengan pandangan dan perbincangan luar kota. Berita dan isu semasa yang wajib anda ketahui sebelum anda keluar rumah. Paparan terkini, kupasan mendalam. Kami temani anda di waktu pagi untuk hari yang lebih ceria dan produktif. Gigi Ahmad, Afizi Azaman, Hakim Rahman, Hafizi Rosli dan Naila Huda. Semuanya di Awani Pagi. Bayangkan pagi anda dengan...
Thank you for staying with Sharad and I on Consider This. The role of teachers and school leaders have completely changed due to the pandemic, and the unprecedented nature of this situation means that there is no set direction for educators to follow. Cheryl Fernando is the Country Director of Global School Leaders, which is a non-profit focused on providing leadership training and coaching for school principals. Cheryl, good evening. Thank you for coming on the show tonight. Could you begin by sharing what you've observed as some of the burdens that have been placed on teachers and principals in dealing with this COVID-19 crisis?
I think from what I've seen, the biggest burden on teachers and school leaders is people expect them to carry on teaching as usual. A lot of people think that it's still business as usual, so they're asking teachers, like, why don't we have like this amount of online classes, or why don't we have like all the things that used to happen before the crisis or before the pandemic? But I think people fail to see that this is a different time. You know, things are changing, and teachers cannot carry on teaching as usual. So I think the biggest burden that we are placing is to expect business or teaching to go on as usual when it's not.
Cheryl, is that because parents are thinking about the curriculum, finishing what is necessary to, for the kids to then be prepared for exams, and that, if you fall back on any of these things, the kids are going to be at a disadvantage? What exactly lies at the foundations of the anxieties that you noted?
Yeah, I think because we are so rooted in the system of examinations, and the whole reason, like, we want the kids to go to school is like so that they can pass the examinations and get this amount of A's. But now, when the ministry removed UPSR and PT3, I think the parents are a bit anxious, and they are like, okay, so will my students learn if there's no exam? But then actually, if you think about it, the whole idea of learning is not to learn for an exam. It's actually to gain knowledge, right? So I think it's a bit of a mindset shift that parents need to go through, but it will take time because we're so used to the system that prepares us for exams.
And how have teachers been dealing with this, Cheryl? How have teachers been dealing with this expectation that teaching should carry on as usual, despite that, the whole world is dealing with this pandemic?
Yeah, I think for starters, we have seen a lot of teachers becoming very creative now. They're using lots of online methods. They're really trying their best. But in the work that we do, we always remind teachers to know their locus of control, how much they can do, which are the areas that they can impact, and what they cannot do. Because teachers, like the rest of us, are also staying at home. They have their children, they have all these other things that are happening in the house. It's really tough to conduct an online class for their students. So they really need to know how much they can do. But at the same time, also remember that they really need to help their students get some sort of learning going on during this pandemic.
Cheryl, I don't mean to sound ageist, but is there a generational issue when it comes to teachers? My mother's a teacher, and I'm over 50, but I mean, not everybody switches over to online, platforms with great ease. I mean, I can't get into TikTok, and I'm finding that difficult. Is there a generational issue for teachers?
So it's very interesting. So when we first started our training program with school leaders, the school leaders that we work with are all easily 20 to 30 years older than us coaches. And initially, we found it really a struggle to get them to learn technology. But during this pandemic, because they have no other choice, everyone's got it. Somehow we have all our school leaders on Google Meet. They're all using Google Classroom. So I guess in times of desperation, everyone suddenly learns how to use it because you have no other choice. So sometimes we can hear, things going on in the background, their children coming in to help them use it. But I would say, we're really quite impressed with our school leaders and how well they have taken on to this technology. So I don't think age is an issue.
Do you think that, Cheryl, this is going to continue after, the lockdowns are eased, not just here in Malaysia, but around the world? Do you think that perhaps we might continue this, since it's clear that teachers and students and maybe even parents are able to adapt to the changing classroom?
Yeah. I think we don't get many opportunities for education reform like this, because we talk a lot about wanting to adapt to e-learning and wanting to get people on board with e-learning. But because we are so bogged down by the traditional system before this, so we never really had an opportunity to do this. And an opportunity for reform doesn't always present itself. So I'm really hoping, post-COVID, this will be the new narrative for education. It will be more people getting on board with online tools and looking at different ways that they can do it, and even looking at the curriculum to trim down what is not important, and really focusing on learning to gain knowledge and not in preparation for exams. It's an exciting time, actually.
Your excitement is infectious, Cheryl. I wonder, though, for people who are kind of in your zone, who are thinking about reform and change, this might be an exciting time. But surely there are many teachers for whom change is actually difficult, it's tiring, it's scary. Mm-hmm. What is the reality out there in terms of teachers and their openness to change?
I think so. Before this, when we talked to a lot of teachers about changing and how chalk and talk, the method of teaching doesn't work anymore, we need to engage students, many were very reluctant, only because they are very bounded by the syllabus and the curriculum and all of that. But now, because suddenly, schools are closed and all of that don't exist anymore, so they are more open to exploring different ways. We even saw some of our school leaders setting up Instagram accounts so they can talk to their students.
Wow.
And these are school leaders who are 40s and 50s, but they're doing all of this. They're even taking videos of themselves exercising to show their students and things like that. So it's really very encouraging, I think, to see. I think it will take time, definitely, but at least we're slowly starting to see some changes.
Okay, Cheryl, we're going to have you stay on the line with us. We're going to take a quick break and continue this conversation with Cheryl in just a few minutes. So stay tuned to consider this.
Isra, apa benda rancak TV ni? Rancak TV ni adalah sebuah channel digital yang bernaung di bawah Astro AWANI.
Apa yang best sangat dengan Rancak TV ni?
Of course best. Sebab dia ada macam-macam cerita. Dia ada cerita pasal isu-isu semasa, cerita pasal kesenian, cerita pasal hiburan, cerita pasal kecergasan, cerita pasal sukan, cerita pasal travel, cerita pasal sejarah, fakta-fakta menarik. Dan mereka juga ada buat short film dan juga dokumentari. Dan yang paling penting, Rancak TV tak ada cerita pasal politik.
Wah, menarik tu. Kena bayar ke nak tengok konten-konten Rancak TV ni?
Tak payah bayar, satu sen pun tak payah keluar. Yang penting korang follow, like dan subscribe YouTube, Instagram, Facebook dan juga Twitter Rancak TV. InsyaAllah kehidupan anda akan menjadi lebih rancak selepas itu.
You're watching Consider This with me, Melissa Idris and Sharad Kutan. Let's continue our conversation with Cheryl Fernando from Global School Leaders. Now, Cheryl, we've spoken about teachers and how they've responded to COVID-19. You painted a very inspiring and optimistic picture of teachers adapting to the changes. I want to talk a little bit about the role of school leaders and principals and how they've been responding to this. How should we be thinking about empowering school leaders and principals to, I guess, curate or to customize the response of teaching and learning in their respective schools?
Yeah. So I guess in this crisis, we can look at the school leader as the chief, the person who is supposed to be in charge of information and being inspiring to the teachers. And for us, it's very important for the school leaders to set an example. So if the school leader is not on board with technology, it's very difficult for him or her to encourage their teachers to do the same. So we always encourage our school leaders to be the first ones to show the teachers examples on how to use technology to have their meetings online. We even had a school leader who had their Majlis Persaraan, who had the retirement ceremony online for one of the teachers. So we are seeing so many innovative ways, but it's always the leader who has to start. If the leader is not on board, it's very difficult for the teachers, or the teachers will do it in pockets, but to get everyone on board, the school leader has to be the one driving it. And I think herein lies the very important question of the ministry giving empowerment to school leaders to be able to do this on their own, to be able to decide for themselves what is best for their schools, because not all schools are the same. Some schools, the school leaders are just working on community issues. They are helping families get basic needs, and they're helping their students get basic food supplies. But in some schools, they are more advanced. So the school leader must be able to have that empowerment to decide what is best for their school and how best what they deem fit in this time of crisis.
Cheryl, the difference that you see, is it mapped onto other kind of demographic issues or social issues? I mean, are we looking at urban schools or cities, schools in cities and suburbs doing much better than rural schools? I mean, do we know if there are regional differences where, you know, the more affluent parts of the country are racing ahead while those that are economic less so are not? Do we have any sense of how that is panning out?
So for the schools I work with the schools in KL. We see the issue of urban poor, of course, being one of it. And in many of our schools, the students who are from the B40 communities, they have problems because they don't have access to digital devices. So the digital divide is there. At least when everyone was going to school, it was somewhat of an equal playing field. So every student could get access to that education. But now it's the students who have devices and they have data, they have access. The students who don't, they do not have access. And it's happening in many of the urban schools as well that we work with, even places like TJ and Damansara as well.
But Cheryl, how does this impact the teachers? So we talked about the students, but how does that impact teachers in wanting to deliver and wanting to do their best for their kids? How does that impact them?
So one of the things that we tell our teachers is when you look at the Maslow hierarchy of needs, so we tell them if the bottom part is not achieved, the safety, their physiological needs is not achieved, it's very difficult to talk about learning. So a lot of times we see teachers, especially school leaders as well, trying to help the students get by with the basic amenities. The school leaders that we work with, they reach out to corporates to get them to help the students. and then only they think about learning, because this is not the business as usual. Times are different. So I think it's okay to ensure that the students are getting their basic needs first before looking at their learning.
Yeah. I'm wondering whether there's
a bit realistic.
I'm wondering whether there's an opportunity here, Cheryl, for us to kind of look at other countries and see what they're doing, learn from their perhaps experiences and best practices. I understand you participated in a webinar recently. You spoke to the former Minister of Education from Liberia about how they dealt with the Ebola crisis. What were some of the learnings you can share with us?
Yeah, so I think when he shared with us about the crisis in Liberia, the few things that he said is they really focused on communication. So they wanted to ensure that everyone was getting a clear communication, whether it was school leaders, whether it was teachers and students, onto like what they're supposed to do now, how much they're going to learn, how long the lockdown will last for, and that was very important for them as well. And he also talked about they used a lot of open sources, like they used the government, they used the radio channels and TV channels to help their students. And he also spoke about the reopening of schools. And that's when he said that this is really a time for reform. This is really a time for us to reimagine education, because we speak so much about this, but no opportunity to do so. So this is the time for us to reimagine education.
And how would you reimagine education for Malaysian students and teachers as well, Cheryl?
So I think, firstly, for it to be more student-centered rather than teacher-centered. Right now, the traditional, before COVID, the traditional classroom is still very teacher-centered. And that's why we find a lot of our students struggling with higher order thinking, and they're struggling to answer questions when they go for job interviews. But if the classroom is more student-centered, we can focus it more on students. We can focus on higher order thinking for our students to make learning more meaningful for them, rather than just based on exams and studying to get A's. So learning has to be very meaningful, and it has to be student-centered.
Yes, Cheryl, can I just ask for a clarification? When you say it's teacher-centered now, you mean the teacher is the one that's giving the information, as opposed to student-centered, where the teacher enables or facilitates the children studying. Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Okay. And I also want to get you to clarify. So you said that the former Minister of Education in Liberia focused a lot on communication. Are we focused a lot on communication, and the communication between which kind of parties?
So right now, a lot of our teachers, they get the information from the Ministry of Education. So I think while the ministry is doing a good job communicating, it's a bit piecemeal here and there. So it'll be good if teachers can see like a clear plan on what's going to happen in the next few months. And I know it's quite unfair to say this, because I'm sure the ministry is still thinking about it, but it'll be nice for teachers to have some sort of direction on like, okay, so for this month, this is what's going to happen, and then next month, this is what's going to happen, this is how learning will look like. It's nice to have like some sort of direction. And I know there's no playbook for education in pandemic, but it'll still be good to see like some sort of a clear action plan from the ministry.
Cheryl, thank you so much for speaking with us tonight, and thank you for the good work that you and your team do, and happy Teachers' Day to you and all educators. That's all the time we have for you on this episode of Consider This. I'm Melissa Idris. With me, Sharad Kutan, signing off this evening. Have a wonderful weekend ahead. Thank you so much for watching, and good night.